Have you ever hit rock bottom, clutching the only thing you have left on a freezing floor? Matilda was a heavily overweight, exhausted maid, hiding a forbidden baby in the basement of a billionaire's mansion. When the door creaked open at 3 a.m., she expected the cruel housekeeper. Instead, looming in the shadows was Gregory Sinclair, the ruthless vampire king himself. What he did next shocked the entire immortal underworld. Stay tuned, because this story takes a twist nobody saw coming. The Sinclair estate sat like a brooding fortress in the remote, heavily wooded hills of upstate New York. To the human world, it was the private retreat of the reclusive Sinclair family, an old money dynasty that practically owned the state's real estate market. To the hidden world, it was the seat of power for the Eastern Coven. It was a place of dark velvet, chilled wine glasses filled with deep red liquid and unspeakable cruelty. Matilda Lawson didn't care about the politics of the rich, and she certainly didn't know about the vampires. She only cared about survival. Matilda was 28, a plus-size woman whose soft curves and heavy frame made her the constant target of mockery among the cruel, impossibly beautiful staff of the estate. While the other maids were thin, pale, and moved with a haunting grace, Matilda was clumsy, loud, and constantly out of breath from hauling heavy linens up 4 flights of stairs. She had taken the job out of pure desperation. Her older sister Sarah had vanished a year ago, leaving behind a newborn baby boy named Oliver. The police called it a runaway case. Matilda knew her sister would never abandon her child. Left with crushing debt, an eviction notice, and a wailing infant, Matilda had answered a cryptic ad for a live-in housekeeper at the Sinclair estate. The pay was astronomical, but the rules were absolute: no visitors, no loud noises, no children. For 6 months, Matilda had kept Oliver a secret. It was a miracle of logistics and sheer maternal desperation. She kept him in a padded laundry basket in her cramped basement quarters, sneaking him formula she bought during her rare hours of leave. But the head housekeeper, a viciously sharp woman named Isabella Clark, hated Matilda. Isabella despised Matilda's weight, often sneering that a woman of her girth was an eyesore to the estate's flawless aesthetic. Just 2 days ago, Isabella had accidentally ordered the maintenance crew to remove Matilda's broken bed frame without replacing it, claiming a new one wouldn't arrive for a month. "A little time on the floor might do your spine some good, Matilda," Isabella had smirked, her eyes gleaming with unnatural malice. "Maybe it will help you shed some of that excess." The basement floor was made of raw, unheated stone. November had brought a bitter freeze to New York, and the chill seeped through the concrete like icy fingers. It was 3 a.m. on a Tuesday. Matilda was exhausted to her very bones. Her back ached from scrubbing the massive ballroom floors, her thick thighs burned from the stairs, and her hands were raw from harsh chemicals. She lay on the freezing stone floor, shivering violently. She only had one thin wool blanket, and she had wrapped it entirely around baby Oliver, who was tucked safely into the crook of her stomach. Matilda's large, soft body acted as a human shield against the freezing drafts of the basement. She curled her heavy frame tightly around the infant, pressing her warm chest to his back, using her own body heat to keep the chill away from him. She didn't care that the cold stone was biting into her own hips and shoulders, leaving deep bruises. She didn't care that her joints screamed in protest. Oliver was warm, breathing softly, his tiny fingers curled into the fabric of her worn-out nightgown. "Shh, sweet boy," Matilda whispered, her teeth chattering as a draft swept under the door. "Auntie Mattie's got you. I've got you." She closed her eyes, a tear slipping down her plump cheek, praying for the morning sun. She had no idea that the sun was the last thing she needed to worry about. Upstairs, the heavy oak doors of the estate had just swung open. Gregory Sinclair had returned. Gregory Sinclair, the undisputed king of the Eastern Coven, was not supposed to be back for another 3 months. He had been in Europe violently suppressing a rebellion among the Parisian covens. He was over 500 years old, a towering, terrifying figure with broad shoulders, piercing, storm-grey eyes, and a heart that had stopped beating centuries ago. He was in a foul mood. The modern world disgusted him. The vampires of today had become soft, decadent, and obsessed with human luxuries. They played at being aristocrats, starving themselves to look like porcelain dolls, treating humans like disposable playthings. Gregory valued strength, loyalty, and survival. As he walked through the grand foyer of his estate, dismissing the panicked, bowing guards with a flick of his hand, he felt an overwhelming sense of emptiness. His heightened senses immediately catalogued the state of his home. He could smell the stale blood in the chalices, the expensive perfumes of his elite guards, and the terrified, rapid heartbeats of the human staff cowering on the upper floors. But then he caught a scent that made him stop dead in his tracks. It was coming from the lowest level of the estate, the servants' quarters. Gregory's nostrils flared. It wasn't the scent of fear or expensive perfume. It was the scent of cheap baby powder, sour milk, and Exhaustion. Deep, profound human exhaustion. But intertwined with that was something else, a scent that hit Gregory like a physical blow to his chest. It was the smell of royal blood, his bloodline. Moving faster than the human eye could track, Gregory descended the stone steps into the basement. The temperature dropped significantly down here. He frowned. He had strictly ordered that even the lowest human servants be kept in warm, comfortable conditions. A healthy staff meant healthy blood. Someone had disobeyed him. He followed the scent to a rusted metal door at the end of the hall. He didn't knock. He simply turned the handle and pushed it open. The room was pitch black, but to a vampire it was as clear as day. Gregory froze in the doorway, his storm-grey eyes widening at the sight before him. Lying on the bare, freezing stone floor was a human woman. She was not the ethereal, bony standard of beauty his court favored. She was a large woman, heavy and round, her thick dark hair tangled in a messy bun. She was wearing a threadbare, oversized nightgown, her large bare feet pressed against the cold stone. She was shivering so violently that her teeth clicked together. But it wasn't her size that captivated Gregory. It was what she was doing. Her large, soft body was curled into a protective crescent moon. Tucked securely in the warmth of her heavy breasts and thick stomach was a tiny, sleeping infant. She had given the baby her only blanket, using her own excess flesh and body heat as a furnace to keep the child alive in the freezing room. Gregory stared. In his 5 centuries of life, he had seen mothers abandon their children for a drop of immortality. He had seen vampires betray their own sires for a scrap of power. He had lived in a world of cold, hard edges and ruthless ambition. Yet here, on the filthy floor of his basement, was a display of pure, unadulterated sacrifice. The woman's body was soft, maternal, and wholly dedicated to preserving the life of the child, completely ignoring her own immense suffering. And then Gregory looked closer at the baby. The infant shifted in his sleep, his little head turning toward the doorway. Gregory's dead heart gave a phantom lurch. The baby had pale, translucent skin and a very distinct faint birthmark on his neck, a crescent moon. It was the mark of the Sinclair bloodline. Gregory's mind raced. A year ago, his younger brother Thomas had been assassinated in the city. Thomas was a notorious playboy who had a penchant for human women. The council had assured Gregory that Thomas's lineage had died with him. They had lied. This baby was Thomas's son, a half-vampire royal heir. And this poor, heavily overweight human maid had been protecting him, starving herself and freezing on a stone floor to keep the king's nephew alive. A strange, unfamiliar emotion clawed its way up Gregory's throat. It felt suspiciously like awe. He stepped fully into the room. His heavy boots made no sound. He knelt beside Matilda. Up close, he could see the dark circles under her eyes, the bruises on her shoulders from the hard floor. He reached out slowly, his large, cold hand hovering over her flushed, shivering cheek. As if sensing the predator in the room, Matilda gasped and woke up. Her eyes flew open. She saw the towering, terrifying man looming over her in the dark. Panic seized her throat. She didn't scream. Her first instinct, her only instinct, was to throw her heavy arms over Oliver, pressing the baby tighter into her soft stomach, shielding him with her own body. "Please," Matilda whispered, her voice cracking, tears instantly welling in her eyes. "Please don't hurt him. Take me. Punish me. I'll leave right now. Just don't hurt the baby." Gregory looked at this terrified, trembling woman. She thought he was here to kill them. Instead of baring his fangs, Gregory unclasped the heavy, fur-lined velvet cloak from his broad shoulders. With surprisingly gentle hands, he draped the massive, incredibly warm garment over Matilda and the baby, tucking it around her shivering shoulders. "No one is going to hurt you." Gregory's voice was a low, resonant rumble that vibrated in the small room. "And no one will ever force you to sleep on a floor again." The next morning, the Sinclair estate was thrown into chaos. At 7 a.m., Isabella Clark marched down the basement steps, flanked by 2 burly security guards. She had finally gathered enough evidence to fire Matilda. She had heard a baby crying the previous week, and she was ready to throw the fat, useless maid out into the freezing snow. Isabella kicked open the door to Matilda's room, a cruel smirk playing on her painted lips. "All right, Matilda, your time is—" Isabella's voice died in her throat. The room was not freezing. In fact, 2 industrial space heaters had been brought in and were humming warmly. But that wasn't what made Isabella's blood run cold. Sitting on a plush velvet armchair that had definitely not been there yesterday was Gregory Sinclair. The Vampire King was dressed in a sharp black suit, his legs crossed elegantly. In his arms, he was awkwardly but gently holding baby Oliver, feeding him a bottle of warm formula. Matilda was sitting on a newly assembled massive king-sized bed in the corner, wrapped in Gregory's royal cloak, looking utterly terrified and confused. Isabella dropped her clipboard, her knees knocked together. My lord, you've returned." Gregory did not look up from the baby. "Isabella," he said, his voice terrifyingly calm, "explain to me why my nephew, the sole heir to the Sinclair bloodline, was found sleeping on a freezing stone floor last night." Isabella turned a shade of sickly grey. Your nephew, sire, I didn't know she hid the child. That disgusting fat creature broke the rules. Crack. In a fraction of a second, Gregory was standing. He had handed the baby back to Matilda so fast she barely registered the movement. Gregory's hand was wrapped securely around Isabella's throat, lifting her entirely off the ground. The two security guards immediately dropped to their knees, bowing their heads, trembling in fear. You will not speak of her in that manner, Gregory hissed, his eyes flashing a dangerous glowing crimson. This woman showed more honor and loyalty in one night than you have in your entire miserable existence. You deliberately broke her bed. You condemned a human and my blood kin to the cold. Please, Isabella choked out, kicking her legs. Matilda, clutching Oliver to her heavy chest, watched in absolute horror. She finally realized what these people were. The glowing red eyes, the impossible speed. Vampires. The monsters from her sister's frantic dismissed journals were real. My lord, please, Matilda suddenly cried out, her voice shaking. Gregory froze. He slowly turned his head to look at Matilda. The blazing crimson in his eyes faded back to a calm, storm grey. He dropped Isabella like a discarded rag doll. She collapsed to the floor, gasping for air. Pack your things, Isabella, Gregory commanded softly. You are stripped of your position. If I ever see your face on my territory again, I will tear your head from your shoulders. Isabella scrambled away on her hands and knees, weeping in terror. Gregory turned back to Matilda. The massive, intimidating king of the Eastern Coven stood awkwardly before the plump, terrified maid. He could hear her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. You're a vampire, Matilda whispered, clutching the baby so tight he let out a small squeak. I am, Gregory said, taking a slow step back to give her space. My name is Gregory Sinclair. The child you are holding is the son of my late brother Thomas. He is half vampire. No. Matilda looked down at Oliver. The puzzle pieces clicked together. Sarah's disappearance, the baby's unnaturally pale skin, his aversion to sunlight. My sister, Matilda choked out. Sarah Lawson, did you kill her? No, Gregory said, his voice solemn. Thomas made enemies. A rival coven attacked them. Thomas died defending her, but she succumbed to her injuries shortly after giving birth. I assumed the child was lost, until last night. Matilda sobbed, burying her face in Oliver's soft hair. The confirmation of her sister's death shattered her, even though she had suspected it for months. Gregory watched her cry. To him, her tears were not a sign of weakness. They were a testament to her immense capacity for love. He noticed how beautifully her dark hair fell across her full cheeks, how the royal cloak draped over her wide, soft hips. For centuries, Gregory had been surrounded by vampires who were nothing but sharp angles, cold skin, and hollow souls. Matilda was the exact opposite. She was warmth. She was life. She was a sanctuary. Matilda, Gregory said gently. She looked up, wiping her nose with the back of her hand, feeling incredibly self-conscious of her messy appearance and heavy frame in front of this immortal god. You kept my bloodline alive, Gregory stated, bowing his head slightly in a gesture of profound respect. From this day forward, you are no longer a maid. You are the royal guardian of the Sinclair heir. You will be moved to the master wing. You will have access to my wealth, my protection, and my physicians. Matilda blinked, stunned. I don't belong upstairs. I'm just a maid. I'm not like the people up there. You are absolutely right, Gregory said, a rare, genuine smile touching his lips, making him look devastatingly handsome. You are entirely unlike them, and for that I am eternally grateful. He stepped forward and knelt before the bed, bringing himself down to her eye level. Will you allow me to protect you, Matilda, just as you protected him? Matilda looked into the eyes of the vampire king. She had nothing left in the world but Oliver, and here was the most powerful creature on earth kneeling before her, asking for permission. Slowly, her trembling hand reached out and she nodded. The entire hierarchy of the Sinclair estate was about to be turned upside down. The untouchable vampire king had just elevated a plus-size human maid to the highest seat of power in his home, and the rest of the coven was not going to take this quietly. The transition from the freezing concrete depths of the servants' quarters to the master wing was disorienting, like waking from a terrible nightmare into a hallucination. Gregory Sinclair did not simply move Matilda. He orchestrated a complete relocation with terrifying efficiency. Within an hour of Isabella's dismissal, Matilda found herself standing in a suite that was larger than her entire childhood home. The floors were covered in plush, cream-colored Persian rugs that felt like clouds beneath her bruised bare feet. A massive four-poster bed, draped in rich burgundy silks, dominated the room, flanked by two roaring fireplaces built into the dark marble walls. To her right, massive French doors led to a private balcony overlooking the snow-covered pine forests of the estate. Matilda stood frozen near the doorway, clutching a freshly bathed and sleeping Oliver. She felt profoundly out of place. Her worn-out, oversized nightgown was stained with bleach and old formula. She was hyper-aware of her size, the heavy set of her hips, and the soft roundness of her stomach. This room was designed for immortals of flawless, terrifying beauty. She felt like a muddy, stray dog invited into a palace. Gregory stood by the window, watching her with those intense storm-gray eyes. He had changed from his travel suit into a simple black tailored shirt and slacks, looking impossibly broad and powerful. "You are shaking, Matilda," Gregory said, his voice a low rumble that seemed to warm the air itself. I shouldn't be here," she stammered, looking down at her bare feet. "The carpets. I'll ruin them. I haven't showered properly in days. The water in the basement was always freezing." A shadow passed over Gregory's face, a flash of pure, murderous rage directed at the memory of Isabella and his own negligence. But he forced his features to soften as he stepped toward her. "The carpets are meaningless. You are what matters. There is a hot bath drawn for you in the adjoining room. I have sent for a human chef from the city to prepare you whatever you desire. Please, Matilda, allow yourself to rest." He gently reached out and took Oliver from her arms. The sight of the towering, deadly vampire king holding the tiny, fragile infant with such practiced care made Matilda's chest ache. Matilda retreated into the bathroom, and when she saw the massive clawfoot copper tub steaming with hot water and lavender oils, she broke down. She stripped off her ruined clothes and sank into the scalding water. For the first time in 6 months, her joints didn't scream. The deep, aching chill in her bones began to melt away. She scrubbed her skin until it was pink, washing away the smell of cheap cleaning chemicals and basement dust. When she finally emerged, wrapped in a heavy, luxurious silk robe that swallowed her large frame, she found a feast waiting for her on a mahogany table near the fire. Roast chicken, garlic potatoes, steaming vegetables, and warm bread. But old habits from the trauma of poverty die hard. Instead of sitting down to eat, Matilda nervously grabbed a dinner roll and quickly shoved it into the deep pocket of her robe, her eyes darting toward the door. She was terrified that this was a trick, that she would be banished back to the cold at any moment, and she needed to hoard whatever food she could for Oliver and herself. "You don't need to do that anymore," Matilda gasped, spinning around. She hadn't heard Gregory enter. He was standing by the door, his eyes fixed on the bulge in her pocket. He didn't look angry. He looked absolutely heartbroken. "I'm sorry," Matilda whispered, her cheeks burning with intense shame. She reached into her pocket to pull the bread out, tears welling in her eyes. "I'm so sorry. I know I'm greedy. I'm used to—" Before she could finish, Gregory crossed the room in a blur of motion. He didn't take the bread. Instead, he placed his large, cold hands gently over hers, keeping the food secured in her pocket. "Keep it," he said softly, his thumbs brushing over her knuckles. "Keep it, hide it, do whatever makes you feel safe. But know this, Matilda, as long as I draw breath, or rather as long as I walk this earth, you will never know hunger again. You will never know the cold. Your body has endured enough suffering for the sake of my bloodline. It is time you were worshipped, not punished." His words struck her like lightning. Worshipped. No one had ever used that word to describe her. Throughout her life, her weight had made her invisible to men, or worse, a target for cruel jokes. Yet here, the most terrifying and beautiful creature she had ever seen was looking at her soft, heavy curves with an expression of profound reverence. The peace, however, was violently shattered the next afternoon. Gregory had summoned human tailors to measure Matilda for a new wardrobe. As she stood uncomfortably in the center of the room, while women draped her in expensive silks, the heavy oak doors swung open without a knock. In walked Lady Cassandra Belmont, a high-ranking vampire of the Eastern Council. Cassandra was painfully thin, her skin like white marble, her cheekbones sharp enough to cut glass. She wore a blood-red gown that clung to her skeletal frame. She sneered as she took in the sight of the plus-size human Maid surrounded by luxury. "So the rumors are true," Cassandra drawled, her voice like dripping venom. She circled Matilda, eyeing her large thighs and heavy waist with overt disgust. "The king has brought a human pig into the master wing. Tell me, human, do they even make fabrics wide enough to cover that circumference, or did they have to stitch the drapes together?" Matilda shrank in on herself, the familiar sting of humiliation burning her eyes. She pulled the measuring tape away, wanting to hide. Suddenly, the temperature in the room plummeted to freezing. The human tailors gasped and backed away against the walls. Gregory materialized from the shadows of the hallway, his face an impenetrable mask of pure fury. He didn't yell. He walked slowly toward Cassandra, the silence in the room deafening. Cassandra, Gregory whispered, his voice dangerously soft. You have trespassed into the private sanctuary of the royal guardian. Gregory, darling, be reasonable, Cassandra scoffed, though her eyes betrayed a flicker of fear. You cannot elevate a human, a fat, low-born maid to this status. The council is laughing. Look at her. She is a symbol of human excess and weakness. Gregory stopped inches from Cassandra. You mistake starvation for strength, Cassandra. You are brittle, hollow. You have spent centuries trying to erase your own substance to fit a pathetic, dead aesthetic. Gregory turned his gaze to Matilda, and his eyes softened. Matilda is life. Her body provided warmth when my nephew was freezing. Her flesh shielded the royal air when my own kin failed him. Every curve, every inch of her is a testament to survival abundance and maternal strength. She is 1,000 times the woman you will ever be. Cassandra gasped, her pale face turning blotchy with rage and humiliation. You are stripped of your lands in the Hamptons, Gregory commanded, coldly, not looking at the vampire anymore. Your title on the High Council is suspended pending my review. Leave this room before I remove your head. Cassandra fled. Matilda stood trembling, staring at Gregory. He had not just defended her, he had validated the very body that the world had taught her to hate. For the first time in her 28 years, Matilda felt a flicker of true pride in who she was. A week passed, and the Sinclair estate was buzzing with a dangerous, unspoken tension. The vampires of the Eastern Coven were forced to bow to Matilda whenever she walked the halls with baby Oliver. To the immortal elite, this was the ultimate humiliation, submitting to a plus-size human who until recently had been scrubbing their floors. But fear of the Vampire King kept their fangs hidden and their whispers confined to the shadows. Gregory, however, was not content with mere compliance. He intended to cement Matilda and Oliver's status in the immortal world, which meant a formal presentation to the Coven Council. He threw a grand banquet in the estate's colossal dining hall, a room dripping with crystal chandeliers and dark velvet. Matilda was terrified. The human tailors had crafted her a magnificent gown of deep emerald green velvet. The heavy fabric cinched gracefully at her waist and flared out, perfectly complementing her full figure. Her dark hair was pinned up with diamonds, and a subtle application of makeup made her brown eyes wide and striking. When Gregory saw her at the bottom of the stairs, he actually stopped breathing for a moment, his stormy eyes dark with an emotion that made Matilda's pulse race. "You look breathtaking," he murmured, offering her his arm. The banquet was an exercise in psychological warfare. The long table was lined with the most powerful vampires in North America. They feigned polite smiles, sipping from crystal goblets filled with warm, imported human blood, while a full, luxurious human meal was placed exclusively in front of Matilda at the head of the table. Sitting to Gregory's right, Matilda felt the oppressive weight of a dozen predatory gazes. They watched her eat, their eyes tracking her every movement. She could hear their whispered, telepathic judgments. "Look at how she consumes. Disgusting. A cow dressed in silk." Matilda's appetite vanished, but Gregory reached under the heavy tablecloth and placed his large, reassuring hand firmly on her thick thigh, giving it a gentle, grounding squeeze. "I am here," the touch said. "You are safe." Suddenly, the heavy mahogany doors swung open. A nanny carried in a crying Oliver. The baby was meant to be formally presented to the council, but something was terribly wrong. Oliver wasn't just fussing, he was screaming. His tiny face was bright red, his fists clenched tight, and he was thrashing violently. "Bring him to me," Gregory ordered, standing up. He took the child, but Oliver only screamed louder, his piercing cries echoing off the vaulted ceilings. Dr. Harrison Finch, the Coven's chief medical officer, a vampire who had been practicing medicine since the 1800s, stepped forward quickly. "My lord, the child is rejecting his human half. His blood is boiling. We need to administer a localized ice bath and a drop of pure vampire venom to stabilize his core temperature immediately." The council erupted into murmurs. "I knew it," muttered Lord Preston, a sneering aristocrat. "A half-breed abomination. He won't survive the night." Dr. Finch reached for the infant, pulling out a terrifyingly long syringe filled with silver liquid. "Stop!" Matilda yelled, her voice cutting through the room like a whip. The entire council fell dead silent. A human had just raised her voice to a high council physician. Dr. Finch glared at her. "Know your place, human. The king's heir is dying of a mystical blood fever." Matilda ignored him. She practically shoved past her heavy mahogany chair, her emerald gown sweeping the floor as she rushed to Gregory. She didn't ask for permission. She reached out and took the thrashing baby from the king's arms. "He doesn't have a mystical blood fever, you absolute idiots," Matilda said, her maternal instincts completely overpowering her fear of the vampires. She laid Oliver flat on his back on the velvet-draped dining table, right in front of the horrified council. She quickly unbuttoned his tiny silk suit. "Look at his stomach," she pointed out. It was hard and distended. She grabbed his little legs and began pumping them in a bicycle motion, pressing his knees gently but firmly into his belly. He's a 3-month-old baby. His digestive tract is mostly human right now. He's not rejecting his bloodline. He has severe gas and colic. Dr. Finch scoffed loudly. Preposterous, you dare insult my centuries of medical— Before the doctor could finish, a loud, remarkably long string of flatulence erupted from the tiny infant on the table. The grand, terrifying dining hall of the Eastern Coven fell into a stunned, absolute silence. Oliver immediately stopped crying. His red face returned to a peaceful, pale shade. He blinked his large grey eyes, let out a soft coo, and popped his thumb into his mouth, perfectly content. Matilda scooped him up, resting him comfortably against her ample chest, gently patting his back to coax out a final burp. She glared at Dr. Finch. You were going to inject a colicky infant with vampire venom. You would have killed him. Gregory began to laugh. It started as a low rumble in his chest and erupted into a full, booming, joyous laugh that the council had not heard in 300 years. The Vampire King looked at the terrified physician, then at the arrogant lords, and finally at the plush, fiery human woman standing before him. Centuries of knowledge? Gregory mocked the council, his eyes gleaming with pride as he looked at Matilda. And my entire medical staff is bested by the wisdom of a human mother. Let this be a lesson to all of you. You are arrogant in your immortality. You have forgotten what it means to live. Matilda stays, and her word regarding my nephew is absolute law. Anyone who questions her will answer to my fangs. That night, Matilda proved that she was not just a prop or a charity case. She was the anchor keeping the Sinclair bloodline alive. But while she had won a battle, she had unwittingly painted a massive target on her own back. The atmosphere in the master wing shifted dramatically over the next few weeks. The professional distance between the king and the guardian began to blur, replaced by a magnetic, undeniable pull. Gregory found himself spending every evening in Matilda's suite. He would sit by the fire reading ancient texts while Matilda sat on the plush rug playing with Oliver. Gregory was utterly fascinated by her. He loved the sound of her laughter, rich and uninhibited. He loved the way she moved, not with the predatory, silent grace of a vampire, but with a heavy, grounded reality. When she accidentally bumped into a table, she would curse under her breath and rub her hip. She was painfully, beautifully human. One evening, a violent thunderstorm raged outside the estate. Oliver had finally fallen asleep in his crib. Matilda was sitting on the edge of the large couch, wearing a soft, oversized sweater that slipped off one shoulder. She was exhausted, staring blankly into the flames. Gregory closed his book and moved to sit beside her. The couch dipped under his immense weight. You are troubled, Gregory said softly, his deep voice barely audible over the crackle of the fire and the rain lashing against the windows. Matilda sighed, pulling the sweater tighter around her thick frame. I worry about the future. Oliver is growing so fast. What happens when he needs to learn about his vampire half? I can't teach him that. I'm just me. I'm a human. I'm heavy. I'm slow. I'm fragile. Eventually he's going to realize I don't belong in this world. Gregory's jaw tightened. He reached out his long, cool fingers, gently tracing the line of her jaw, making her breath hitch. Never speak of yourself that way, Gregory murmured, his storm-gray eyes locking onto hers with a burning intensity. You think your human nature is a weakness? I see it as the ultimate strength. My kind. We are stagnant. We are cold stones waiting out eternity. You burn, Matilda. You feel, you bleed, you fight. He moved closer, the scent of pine and ozone rolling off his skin. His gaze dropped to her collarbone, to the soft swell of her chest, visible beneath the sweater. I have spent 500 years surrounded by perfection, by creatures who have starved themselves to look like marble statues. I am so deeply tired of cold marble. Gregory's hand slid to the back of her neck, his thumb resting over her pulse point. He closed his eyes, savoring the frantic, rapid flutter of her heartbeat against his cold skin. I crave warmth, he whispered, leaning in until his lips were mere inches from hers. I crave you. Matilda's heart hammered against her ribs. She closed her eyes, leaning into his touch, terrified but exhilarated. The king of the vampires wanted her, not despite her size, but because of her warmth, her softness, her very humanity. Before their lips could meet, a sharp knock on the door shattered the moment. Gregory pulled back his eyes, flashing crimson with annoyance. What is it? He barked. A guard's voice trembled through the heavy oak. My lord, there has been a breach at the southern border of the estate. A pack of rogue lichens. The security team requires your immediate command. Gregory stood up, adjusting his cuffs, his demeanor instantly shifting from tender lover to ruthless warlord. I must attend to this. Lock the doors, Matilda. Do not let anyone in. After Gregory left, the suite felt suffocatingly quiet. Matilda tried to read, but her mind was racing. Around 2 a.m. a strange craving hit her. Despite the luxury of her new life, she missed the simple comfort of chamomile tea from the downstairs kitchens. Knowing the estate was on high alert, she figured the halls would be empty. Throwing a dark shawl over her shoulders, she slipped out of her suite. Because she had spent 6 months hiding from the staff, Matilda knew how to move through the estate like a ghost. She stuck to the servant corridors, navigating the narrow hidden passageways built behind the main walls. As she neared the basement kitchen, she heard voices. Matilda froze in the dark passageway, peering through a small ventilation grate that looked down into the pantry. Standing in the dimly lit room was Maxwell, the heavily scarred vampire who served as Gregory's head of security. He was speaking to someone entirely shrouded in a dark, wet cloak, someone who smelled strongly of wet dog and iron. A lichen. The distraction worked, Maxwell hissed, handing the cloaked figure a heavy leather pouch that clinked with gold. The king is occupied at the southern border. He took the elite guard with him. And the half-breed? The lichen growled a guttural sound that vibrated in Matilda's chest. He is in the master wing with the human cow. Maxwell spat with venomous disgust. Gregory is blinded by his fascination with her. He thinks she is the child's savior, but the council will not allow a half-breed to inherit the throne, and they certainly won't bow to a fat human maid. It ends tonight. Matilda clapped her hand over her mouth to stifle a gasp, her eyes wide with absolute horror. Kill the child, Maxwell ordered coldly. Make it look like a tragic accident, a lichen break-in gone wrong. And the human, the cloaked figure let out a sickening, raspy chuckle. Tear her to pieces. Exactly, Maxwell smiled. The king will grieve, but the bloodline will remain pure. Go now. Use the east stairwell. The cameras have been disabled. Matilda's blood ran cold. The southern border breach wasn't an attack. It was a decoy. They were coming for Oliver, and Gregory was miles away. She turned and began to run silently up the dark passageway, her heavy breath burning in her lungs. She didn't have vampire speed or supernatural strength. She only had her wits, her knowledge of the house, and a mother's desperate, terrifying instinct to protect her child at all costs. She had to reach the master wing before the assassin did. The hunt was on. Matilda ran. The hidden servants' corridors behind the grand walls of the Sinclair estate were narrow, pitch black, and thick with centuries of suffocating dust. She knew every sharp turn, every steep, uneven step, but she was not built for speed. Her lungs burned as though she were inhaling crushed glass. Her thick thighs ached and chafed painfully beneath her heavy skirt, and her bare feet caught on exposed splinters and rough floorboards. But Matilda did not slow down. The sheer primal terror pumping through her veins was an unstoppable force. Oliver. She could hear the heavy, muffled thud of the lichen assassin moving through the main hallways. The beast was using the grand staircases, relying on his unnatural speed, but he didn't know the layout of the estate like a maid who had spent 6 months treating the house as a dangerous labyrinth. Matilda had the spatial advantage, but her human stamina was failing rapidly. She pushed her heavy frame up the final spiraling servant staircase, her hands slipping on the damp brick. Pulling herself forward by sheer willpower, she burst through the concealed door disguised as a bookshelf in the master wing hallway, tumbling hard onto the plush carpet. Gasping for air, a sharp pain shooting up her ribs, she scrambled to her feet and threw herself at the heavy oak doors of her suite. She locked the deadbolts just as she heard a low guttural growl echoing from the far end of the corridor. He was here. Matilda didn't scream. She didn't freeze. Her maternal instinct completely hijacked her nervous system. She rushed to the crib where Oliver was sleeping peacefully, completely unaware of the nightmare unfolding outside. She scooped him up, wrapping him tightly in a thick wool blanket to muffle any cries, and looked wildly around the massive room. The suite was luxurious, but it offered little true defense against a supernatural predator. The lichen would tear through the oak doors in seconds. Matilda ran to the massive walk-in cedar closet. She pushed Oliver deep into a hidden alcove behind rows of heavy winter coats, stacking velvet hat boxes in front of the gap to conceal him. "Do not make a sound, my sweet boy," she whispered, kissing his forehead, tears streaming down her face. "Auntie Mattie loves you. I love you so much." She closed the closet door. She would not hide with him. If the lichens smelled them both in the closet, they would both die. She had to be the distraction. She had to be the prey. Matilda turned back to the room. The handle of the heavy oak door began to violently rattle. She scanned the room for a weapon. Her eyes landed on the roaring fireplace. She lunged forward and grabbed the heavy wrought-iron fire poker. Its tip was glowing a violent cherry red from sitting in the flames. She then grabbed a heavy, solid silver tray from her discarded room service cart. Vampires kept pure silver around as a status symbol, immune to it themselves. But lichens were deathly allergic. Crack! The solid oak door splintered down the middle. Wood flew across the room like shrapnel. A massive hulking figure stepped through the ruins of the doorway. The lichen had partially shifted. He was a horrifying amalgamation of man and wolf. Thick wire-like fur sprouted from his neck and arms, his face elongated into a snout dripping with foul-smelling saliva. His yellow eyes locked onto Matilda. "Where is the half-breed?" The beast rasped, his voice sounding like two grinding stones. Matilda stood in the center of the room, her heavy frame planted firmly between the beast and the closet. She held the glowing hot fire poker in her right hand and the heavy silver tray in her left, like a crude shield. Her heart was beating so fast it blurred into a continuous roar in her ears, but her hands did not shake. "You're not touching my baby," Matilda said, her voice dropping to a low, dangerous octave she didn't know she possessed. The lichen laughed, a wet, horrifying sound. "A fat human cow playing hero. I will enjoy eating you." He lunged. The beast moved with a terrifying blur of speed, but Matilda's heavy weight and low center of gravity kept her grounded. As he swiped a massive clawed hand at her head, she ducked the claws, missing her by inches. She didn't retreat. Instead, she threw her entire body weight forward, ramming the heavy silver tray directly into the lichen's exposed chest. The moment the pure silver made contact with his skin, a sickening hiss filled the room. The beast let out an agonizing, ear-piercing howl as the metal burned through his fur and flesh. He violently backhanded her. The force of the blow lifted Matilda completely off her feet. She flew backward, crashing hard into the heavy mahogany dining table. The wood splintered under her weight, and she crumpled to the floor, gasping as pain exploded in her ribs and shoulder. Her vision swam. Blood poured from a deep gash on her forehead, blinding her left eye. The lichen recovered, clutching his smoking, blistered chest. His yellow eyes were entirely consumed by murderous rage. He stalked toward her, kicking the silver tray across the room. "You will die slowly for that," he snarled, raising his massive claws to deliver the killing blow. Matilda lay on the floor, her body screaming in agony. She couldn't lift her arms, but she looked toward the closet, knowing Oliver was safe inside, and she felt a strange, profound sense of peace. She had done her job. But the killing blow never came. Instead, the enormous floor-to-ceiling glass windows of the balcony shattered inward in a spectacular explosion of rain, wind, and flying glass. 10 miles away at the southern border, Gregory Sinclair stood amidst the pouring rain and the scattered, broken bodies of a dozen rogue lichens. He was wiping the blood from his hands with a pristine silk handkerchief when a chilling realization washed over him. The beasts he and his elite guard had just slaughtered were emaciated, uncoordinated, and old. They had put up no real fight. They were practically a suicide squad. Why would they attack the most heavily fortified border with their weakest? Gregory's storm-gray eyes widened. He tasted the sour, desperate scent of the rain, a distraction. In that exact moment, a sharp, agonizing, phantom pain pierced Gregory's chest. It wasn't physical. It was a soul-deep severing. Through the chaotic, supernatural energy of the storm, he felt a spike of pure, unadulterated human terror, and then the distinct smell of Matilda's blood. "To the estate now!" Gregory roared to his guards, his voice shaking the surrounding trees. He didn't wait for them. Gregory broke every law of physics, moving faster than sound. The trees blurred into a solid wall of green and black as he tore through the forest. The rain parted around him. His dead heart, which had not beaten in centuries, felt as though it were hammering against his ribs. If she is dead, he thought, a dark, apocalyptic fury rising in his soul, I will burn this entire world to ash. He scaled the sheer stone wall of the estate in seconds, zeroing in on the scent of lichen and human blood pouring from the master wing. Gregory crashed through the reinforced balcony glass like a missile. The lichen spun around his yellow eyes, widening in absolute terror. He had expected the king to be gone for hours. Gregory didn't speak. He didn't ask questions. The sight of Matilda lying broken and bleeding on the floor, surrounded by shattered wood, snapped the final thread of Gregory's restraint. He didn't just attack the lichen. He unraveled him. In a fraction of a second, Gregory's hand wrapped around the beast's throat. With a sickening crunch, he lifted the massive lichen off the floor. The beast clawed frantically at Gregory's arm, but the Vampire King was a statue of indestructible, ancient fury. Gregory's eyes were glowing a blinding, horrific crimson. "You dared to touch what is mine," Gregory whispered, a sound that seemed to echo from the depths of hell. With one brutal, effortless motion, Gregory ripped the lichen's head completely from its shoulders. He tossed the remains aside like garbage and immediately fell to his knees beside Matilda. His terrifying, blood-soaked aura vanished instantly, replaced by a frantic, desperate panic. "Matilda," he choked out, his cold hands hovering over her bruised, bleeding face, afraid that touching her would break her further. "Matilda, open your eyes! Please, please!" Matilda coughed, a ribbon of blood trailing down her chin. She forced her right eye open, looking up at the towering, terrifying king, who was currently looking at her with actual tears of blood welling in his grey eyes. "Oliver," she gasped out, her voice barely a whisper. "Closet, safe." Gregory let out a ragged breath. Even shattered and bleeding, her only thought was the child. "He is safe. You saved him. But you are dying, Matilda. Your ribs are crushed. You are bleeding internally." Don't hurt them," she mumbled, delirium setting in. "The baby?" "I won't let you go," Gregory said, his voice thick with a desperate vow. He bit into his own wrist, his sharp fangs tearing his pale flesh. He pressed his bleeding wrist to her lips. "Drink, it will heal you. Drink, my brave, beautiful queen. I command you to live." Instinctively, Matilda swallowed the heavy coppery liquid. Fire raced through her veins. It wasn't the agonizing burn of a lichen attack. It was a magnificent restorative heat. The shattered bone in her shoulder snapped back into place. The deep gash on her forehead stitched itself closed. The crushed ribs expanded whole and perfect once more. She gasped, sitting up rapidly. Her skin was flushed, her breathing clear. The vampire blood hadn't turned her. She was still fully human, but it had healed her to peak physical condition. Gregory pulled her into his chest, burying his face in her dark hair, holding her soft, heavy body so tightly she could feel the cold, hard lines of his chest. He was shaking. The king of the Eastern Coven was trembling. "I thought I lost you," he whispered into her hair. "I felt your pain, and I thought the only light in my endless, miserable existence had been extinguished." Matilda wrapped her arms around his broad shoulders, burying her face in his neck, finally allowing herself to sob. The moment was interrupted by the sound of heavy boots entering the ruined suite. Maxwell, the head of security, rushed in, flanked by 4 guards. "My lord," Maxwell shouted, feigning shock at the scene. "We heard the glass. The border attack was a decoy. I came as fast as I could." Matilda stiffened in Gregory's arms. She pulled back, her brown eyes locking onto Maxwell. The fear that had consumed her earlier evaporated, replaced by a furious maternal rage. "Liar," Matilda said, her voice ringing clear and strong in the silent room. She pointed a shaking finger at the head of security. "He let the lichen in. I heard him in the basement pantry. He paid the assassin in gold to kill Oliver and me. He wanted the bloodline pure." Maxwell turned pale, but he sneered. "My lord, you cannot possibly believe the ravings of a hysterical human. She is lying to cover her own incompetence." Gregory slowly stood up. The tenderness he had just shown Matilda vanished, locked away behind a mask of chilling, absolute authority. He looked at Maxwell, then at the guards who stood nervously behind him. "My royal guardian does not lie," Gregory said softly. "He didn't use a weapon. He didn't even raise his voice." Gregory simply looked at Maxwell, using the ancient, terrifying psychic weight of his bloodline. Maxwell fell to his knees, clutching his head and screaming in pure agony as Gregory's mind invaded his, tearing past his mental defenses and ripping the truth from his memories. Every conversation, every exchanged coin, every treasonous thought was laid bare. Gregory blinked, breaking the connection. Maxwell collapsed onto the floor, panting, blood dripping from his nose. "Take him to the dungeons," Gregory ordered the trembling guards, his voice devoid of all emotion. "Ensure he does not see the sun nor taste blood until he has lost his mind. Then chain him to the roof and let the dawn finish him." As Maxwell was dragged away screaming, Gregory turned back to Matilda. He walked to the closet and pulled away the velvet boxes, lifting the completely unharmed sleeping Oliver from the alcove. He walked over and placed the baby gently into Matilda's arms. 3 nights later, the grand ballroom of the Sinclair estate was transformed. The High Council of the Eastern Coven had been summoned. They stood in perfectly straight, silent lines, their pale faces drawn tight with anxiety. Word of the lichen attack, Maxwell's brutal execution, and the king's terrifying display of power had spread like wildfire. The message was clear. The king was purging his court of anyone who dared harbor treason in their hearts. But tonight was not an execution. It was a coronation. Gregory stood at the top of the grand, sweeping staircase, dressed in full royal regalia, a suit of deep crimson velvet embroidered with black silver. He looked like a dark god commanding the absolute attention and terror of every immortal in the room. The heavy doors at the top of the landing opened, and a collective silent gasp rippled through the council. Matilda emerged. She did not look like the exhausted, terrified maid who had slept on the freezing basement floor. She did not look like a woman trying to hide her size. She wore a custom gown of midnight blue silk that draped magnificently over her full, soft curves. The heavy fabric gathered at her waist, emphasizing her hips with delicate, glittering silver thread woven through the bodice like a starry night sky. Her dark hair was styled in cascading waves, framing her beautiful round face. She wore no crown, but she carried herself with an undeniable, heavy, grounded majesty. In her arms, dressed in a tiny matching blue velvet suit, was Oliver, Gregory stepped forward, offering her his arm. Matilda took it, her hand resting warmly against his cool sleeve. Together they descended the stairs. A council of the East. Gregory's voice boomed, echoing off the crystal chandeliers. You have spent centuries mistaking fragility for elegance and cruelty for strength. You look upon my court and see only yourselves. That ends tonight. He led Matilda to the center of the room. This woman, Gregory continued, his voice echoing with profound reverence, is human. She bleeds. She feels the cold. She knows hunger. Yet when faced with a supernatural beast that would have torn any of you to shreds, she did not flee. She stood her ground. She bled to protect the future of this coven. She possesses more honor, more strength, and more worth in her human heart than the entirety of this immortal council combined. Gregory turned to face Matilda, taking both of her soft hands in his. He ignored the hundreds of watching eyes. I spent 500 years living in the dark, Matilda, Gregory said softly for her ears, only though the vampire's heightened senses caught every word. You brought warmth back into my dead world. You taught me that a true ruler does not just command, they protect. You protected my blood. Now I ask you to let me protect yours for the rest of your days. He knelt. The king of the Eastern Coven, a predator of unimaginable power, knelt before the plus-size human Maid on the marble floor of the ballroom. I do not just name you guardian, Gregory declared, his voice rising for all to hear. I name you my equal. I name you my queen. Will you stay by my side, Matilda? Matilda looked around the room. She saw the faces of the vampire's creatures who had once mocked her weight, her humanity, her poverty. Now they were looking at her with a mixture of absolute awe and deeply ingrained respect. She looked down at Gregory, the man who had pulled her from the freezing floor, who had defended her body and her soul, and who loved her exactly as she was. I will, Matilda said, her voice steady, loud, and confident. I will stay. Gregory stood, a breathtaking smile breaking across his sharp features. He pulled her flush against his chest and kissed her deeply, a kiss that tasted of ancient promises and new beginnings. The room erupted into a deafening roar of applause. The vampires bowed, forced to recognize the new era of their coven. The years that followed transformed the hidden world entirely. The abolition of cruelty. Under Matilda's influence, the strict cruel treatment of human familiars and staff was abolished. The Sinclair estate became a sanctuary where humans were paid, fairly protected, and respected. The royal heir, Oliver, grew up with the best of both worlds. He had the strength and speed of his vampire lineage, but he was raised with the deep, profound empathy of a human mother. He never had to hide his true nature. The Queen's court. Matilda never changed her size, nor did she ever feel the need to. She became a symbol of abundance, life, and maternal strength in the immortal world. Vampires from across the globe traveled to the Sinclair estate to seek the wisdom of the human queen. Matilda often thought back to that freezing night in the basement. She had thought her life was over, that she was trapped in a cold, unforgiving world. But as she sat by the roaring fire in the master wing, her husband's arm wrapped securely around her waist, and her son playing happily on the Persian rug, she knew the truth. She hadn't hit rock bottom. She had simply been waiting to be found by a king who knew exactly how to treat a queen. What a journey! From a freezing basement floor to the throne of the Vampire King, Matilda proved that true strength isn't about fitting a certain mold. It's about the size of your heart and the fierce love of a mother. Did you love seeing Matilda and Gregory take down the treacherous council? Let me know your favorite moment in the comments below. If this story kept you on the edge of your seat, please hit that like button, share this video with your friends, and subscribe to the channel so you never miss another epic romance. See you in the next story.